It was supposed to be a simple day for Jamal. He was walking back from the corner store, a bag of groceries in one hand and his earbuds in, drowning out the noise of the bustling neighborhood. Then chaos unfolded. The screech of tires snapped him out of his thoughts as a police cruiser careened around the corner at an awkward angle. Jamal froze mid-step as the car narrowly missed a parked food truck and plowed straight into a watermelon stand. Fruit exploded in every direction, scattering seeds and pulp across the pavement. The crowd erupted in laughter and gasps, phones already out to record the spectacle. Jamal, annoyed but curious, moved closer to see the commotion. Inside the cruiser sat a flustered, very pregnant police officer wrestling with her seatbelt. She looked every bit as overwhelmed as the scene she had just caused. Her handcuffs dangled from one wrist, a spilled coffee cup sat on the dashboard, and her police hat rested crookedly over her disheveled hair. Ma'am? You okay in there?" Jamal called out hesitantly, standing a safe distance from the mess. The officer groaned, trying to push open the door. "Help! I'm stuck! And I think I broke the stand." "You don't say," Jamal muttered under his breath, surveying the carnage. Watermelons rolled into the street, nearly causing another accident as drivers honked and swerved. The officer waved frantically. "Young man, please! I need assistance!" Jamal sighed, looked at his bag of groceries, then at the officer. "Man, this ain't my problem," he mumbled. But something in her panicked expression made him pause. Maybe it was the fact that she was pregnant, and looked like she could burst into tears at any second. Against his better judgment, he set his groceries down and walked over. Okay, relax," Jamal said, holding up his hands. "What's the situation?" "My seatbelt's jammed, and my handcuff key is in the cup holder, but I dropped the coffee. And now it's all sticky and I can't." "Got it. You're a mess," Jamal interrupted, trying not to laugh. He reached into the car, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle her. "Let me just. I'll. Watch it. Lady, you want help or not?" Jamal snapped, pulling at the stubborn seatbelt. After a few awkward tugs, it finally came loose, and the officer let out a dramatic sigh of relief. "Thank you. Oh, my goodness, you're a lifesaver," she said, clutching her very round belly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jamal stepped back, brushing watermelon pulp off his hoodie. Yeah, you're welcome. Now maybe you should." Before he could finish, a voice from the crowd shouted, "Yo, somebody get her a driver's ed class." The bystanders erupted into laughter, and the officer's face turned beet red. She turned to Jamal, her eyes wide with sudden inspiration. "Wait. You're a hero." Jamal frowned. What? You saved me. You stepped up when nobody else did," she said, beaming. "What's your name, young man?" "Jamal." "Look, it's not that deep." "Jamal! You're incredible." She grabbed his hand and shook it vigorously, nearly pulling him off balance. "I have to do something to repay you." "No, really, I'm good," Jamal said, trying to back away. But it was too late. The officer was already pulling out her phone, taking selfies with him while the crowd continued to record. Jamal groaned inwardly as the realization hit him. This was going to be on the internet in minutes. And sure enough, someone shouted, "This is going viral!" The officer, seemingly oblivious to Jamal's discomfort, kept smiling. "You're a real hero, Jamal. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did today." Jamal shook his head as he grabbed his groceries and started to walk away. "Man, I don't need all that. Just keep your car off the watermelon stands next time," the officer called after him. "Jamal! I owe you one. You'll see." As he turned the corner, he muttered to himself, "What did I just get myself into?" Little did he know, this bizarre encounter was only the beginning of a chain of events that would turn his entire life upside down. Jamal thought the chaos was over, but the officer clearly had other plans. The very next morning, she showed up at his school. Dressed in her uniform, complete with her still slightly crooked hat, she stood at the entrance like she owned the place. Jamal nearly dropped his backpack when he saw her. "No way," he muttered, ducking into the crowd of students filing in. "Jamal!" Her voice rang out, cutting through the chatter like a siren. Heads turned as she waved enthusiastically, marching toward him with a large box in her hands. "Ah, man!" Jamal groaned under his breath. There was no escaping this. The officer stopped right in front of him, her grin as bright as the morning sun. "Good morning, young hero," she announced loudly enough for everyone within a 10-foot radius to hear. Jamal cringed. Hey, officer. Officer Pam," she said cheerfully, holding up the box. "I brought donuts for you and your classmates as a token of appreciation." The hallway went silent, then erupted into laughter. Jamal's friends were the loudest, hollering and slapping him on the back. "Yo, Jamal got the cops bringing him breakfast now," one of them joked. "Big hero energy," another added, laughing so hard he had to lean against the lockers. Jamal felt his face burn with embarrassment. "This ain't necessary," he mumbled, but Officer Pam was already pulling him toward the front office. "Come on, Jamal! Let's tell everyone about your amazing act of bravery yesterday," she said, practically dragging him along. By lunchtime, the entire school knew the story. Officer Pam had given an impromptu speech in the cafeteria, complete with exaggerated gestures and dramatic pauses. She described Jamal as a shining example of courage and kindness, which earned him a standing ovation from half the students and endless teasing from the other half. Jamal slouched in his seat, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. "This is the worst," he muttered. But Officer Pam wasn't done. She insisted on walking him home after school, holding a clipboard and jotting down notes as they went. "Your neighborhood's got a lot of potential," she said, squinting at the rows of cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts. "I bet we could organize a community cleanup day. Wouldn't that be great?" Jamal stared at her, incredulous. "Lady, you're not from around here, are you?" Pam laughed. "Well, not exactly, but I feel like I'm getting to know the place pretty well. And I want to make a difference, just like you did." "I didn't do anything," Jamal said, exasperated. "I just helped you out of a car." "That's where it starts, Jamal," she said, smiling warmly. "One small act of kindness can spark something big." Jamal rolled his eyes but didn't argue. He just wanted to get home and forget this whole ordeal. When they reached his house, Pam's eyes lit up. "Oh, this is nice. You've got a real sense of community here, huh?" Jamal's mom stepped outside, looking confused. "Who's this?" "Officer Pam," she said, extending her hand. "Your son is a hero. I'm just here to make sure he gets the recognition he deserves." Jamal groaned. "Mom, don't listen to her. She's exaggerating." But Pam was already inside, chatting with his siblings and complimenting their family photos. Jamal could feel a headache coming on. Over the next few days, Pam became a regular fixture in their lives. She showed up at church, bringing homemade cookies that no one dared to eat. She offered to drive Jamal to school, even though her cruiser still smelled faintly of coffee and watermelon. She even tried to join a neighborhood cookout, awkwardly holding a plate of burnt burgers while the neighbors looked on in amusement. At first, Jamal's family found her antics hilarious. His younger sister started calling her Aunt Pam, and his mom joked that they should invite her to Thanksgiving. But Jamal wasn't laughing. "She's everywhere," he complained one evening as his mom folded laundry. "She's like a human tornado, just blowing through everything." "She means well," his mom said, hiding a smile. "And she did call you a hero. That's gotta count for something." "I didn't ask for this," Jamal argued. "She's making my life 10 times harder." His mom gave him a knowing look. "Sometimes, when people see something good in you, they can't help but want to be part of it. Maybe she sees something you don't." Jamal didn't respond. He just hoped Pam would eventually lose interest and move on. But Pam had other plans. While tagging along with Jamal one afternoon, she stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see, something that would change everything. It started with a shortcut. Jamal was leading Pam through an alley on their way to the local community center, hoping to avoid more of her unsolicited pep talks. He knew the neighborhood inside out, and this was the fastest way to get there. "Stay close," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "This isn't exactly the scenic route." Pam, ever optimistic, smiled as she stepped carefully over broken glass. "Jamal, you don't need to worry about me. I've been through worse." But halfway through the alley, Jamal noticed something that made him stop dead in his tracks. A group of men huddled near the back entrance of an old warehouse, their movements quick and deliberate. Packages exchanged hands, and one of them glanced around nervously before slipping inside. "Keep walking," Jamal whispered, his voice low. Pam, oblivious, squinted at the group. "What's going on over there?" "Nothing. Let's go," Jamal said, grabbing her arm to pull her along. But Pam wasn't the type to ignore suspicious activity. "Hold on," she said, pulling out her phone. "That looks like—" Before she could finish, one of the men spotted them. His eyes narrowed, and he nudged the others. In seconds, the group was scattering, disappearing into the warehouse like ghosts. Jamal's heart raced. "Great. Now they've seen us." Pam frowned, her hand hovering over her phone. "This could be something big, Jamal. I need to report it." "No, you don't," he said firmly. "You don't mess with those guys." Pam hesitated, clearly torn between her duty and Jamal's warning. "Jamal, if there's something illegal happening here, I can't just look the other way." "You don't understand," Jamal said, his voice rising. "They're not just gonna forget you saw them. People like that don't play around." Pam looked at him, her expression softening. "Jamal, is this what you deal with? People like them in your neighborhood?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and started walking, hoping she'd take the hint and follow. But he could feel her eyes on him, full of questions she wasn't asking. The encounter left Jamal on edge. He spent the rest of the day looking over his shoulder, half expecting trouble to find him. But it wasn't until later that night, as he sat on his porch, that the full weight of it hit him. Pam had seen too much. And worse, she didn't know when to let things go. The next morning, she was back, bright and early, knocking on the door with a stack of flyers in her hand. "Good news, Jamal. I've got a plan to clean up the neighborhood." Jamal stared at her, half awake and still irritated. "What are you talking about?" Pam held up the flyers, which read, "Community Watch Program, join today," in bold letters. "We're going to take back these streets. With teamwork, determination, and maybe a little elbow grease, we can make this place safe for everyone." Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're serious? After what happened yesterday?" "Especially after what happened yesterday," Pam said, her tone resolute. "People like those men operate in the shadows because no one stands up to them. But if we show them we're united—" "They're not gonna care about your little flyers," Jamal interrupted. "They don't care about anything but their money and their business. You're just gonna make yourself a target." Pam's expression didn't waver. "Jamal, you said it yourself, this is your home. Don't you want to fight for it?" "Not like this," he said, shaking his head. "You don't get it. You don't know what it's like to live here." Pam's voice softened. "You're right. I don't. But I do know that change doesn't happen if everyone's too scared to try." Jamal didn't respond. He just turned and walked back into the house, slamming the door behind him. But Pam wasn't giving up. Over the next few days, she plastered the neighborhood with flyers, talked to shop owners, and even managed to get a few volunteers for her program. Jamal watched from a distance, torn between annoyance and grudging admiration. Then, one evening, Pam showed up on his porch with a determined look in her eyes. "Jamal, I need your help," he groaned. "Why me? You've got plenty of other people buying into your superhero act." "Because they trust you," she said simply. "You know this neighborhood better than anyone. If you're involved, others will follow." Jamal wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her to leave him alone and let him live his life. But deep down, he knew she was right. "Fine," he said finally. But if this goes sideways, it's on you. Pam smiled, holding out her hand. Deal. And just like that, Jamal found himself reluctantly at the center of a movement he didn't even believe in. Over the next few weeks, Jamal found himself in a tug-of-war between his instincts and Officer Pam's relentless optimism. The Community Watch program was slowly gaining traction, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that things were moving too fast. Every day, more people showed up for the meetings, more flyers were distributed, and more plans were made. The neighborhood was buzzing with talk of change, and it was all because of Pam's unwavering belief that they could make a difference. But Jamal knew better. He had seen too much of the dark side of their neighborhood to believe that simply talking about change would be enough. People in power didn't care about protests or programs. They cared about money and control. One night, as the Community Watch volunteers gathered outside for a planning session, Jamal pulled Pam aside. "This isn't going to work," he said, his voice low but urgent. "You can't just wish your way into making this place safer. You don't know what you're up against." Pam's face hardened, a rare moment of seriousness crossing her usually carefree demeanor. "Then show me. Tell me what we're really dealing with here." Jamal hesitated. He had been avoiding this conversation for weeks, but now, he couldn't ignore it any longer. "It's not just a few bad apples, Pam. This whole neighborhood is tied up in this mess. Drugs, gangs, money laundering, you name it. Those guys we saw in the alley? They're just a small part of the bigger picture." Pam's brow furrowed. "So what are we supposed to do? Just give up and let it keep happening?" "No, but we can't take it head on either," Jamal said, frustration creeping into his tone. "You're putting people in danger. The more attention we draw to this, the more dangerous it gets for everyone." Pam studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "So, what's the alternative?" Jamal sighed. "We need to find a way to fight back without making ourselves targets. We need to outsmart them, not outfight them." Pam raised an eyebrow. "And you think you know how to do that?" Jamal gave her a wry smile. "I've got a few ideas." Over the next few days, Jamal started to work in the shadows. He knew the local dealers, the ones who ran the streets at night. He didn't trust them, but he understood how they worked. He started talking to them, casually, like he was just another face in the crowd. At first, they were wary of him, but Jamal had a way of blending in, of not standing out. He asked questions, made small talk, and quietly gathered information. Pam didn't know about any of this. She was too busy organizing, too focused on rallying the community. But Jamal was starting to realize that the fight they were facing wasn't something that could be won with speeches and good intentions. It was going to take something far more calculated, and far more dangerous. Then one evening, while Jamal was out on one of his fact-finding missions, he saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the local crime bosses, a man named Cortez, was meeting with several of the people who had been attending Pam's community meetings. They were talking, laughing, shaking hands. It was all too casual, too friendly. Jamal froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered under his breath. It didn't take long to piece things together. Pam's well-meaning efforts had unintentionally brought the wrong kind of attention to their cause. Cortez wasn't stupid. He knew how to manipulate people, how to play both sides. He had infiltrated the Community Watch, co-opting it to his advantage. Jamal rushed back to his house, his mind racing. He couldn't let Pam find out, not yet anyway. He needed to figure out what to do before it was too late. The next day, Jamal met Pam at the community center. She was busy coordinating a town hall meeting, excited about the turnout. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to go south fast. "Pam," he said, his voice serious. "We need to talk." She looked up, sensing the urgency in his tone. "What's wrong?" "I think we've got a problem," Jamal said, pulling her aside. "I've been watching the people you've been working with, and some of them, they're not who you think they are." Pam's expression faltered. "What do you mean?" "Cortez," Jamal said quietly, his eyes scanning the room as if he expected the crime boss to appear at any moment. "He's been using our meetings to recruit. He's been pulling strings behind the scenes, getting people to work for him." Pam's face paled as the gravity of his words sank in. No, that can't be right." "I wish it weren't," Jamal said, shaking his head. "But it is. We've been played, Pam. And now, it's not just our lives at risk. It's the whole community." Pam took a step back, her mind racing. "What do we do?" Jamal exhaled, feeling the weight of the situation. "We need to stop him before it goes any further. But we can't do it out in the open. We have to be smart, use what we've already built to turn the tables." Pam nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. "Okay. Then let's do it. Together." It wasn't the plan Jamal had hoped for. He knew this was going to get dangerous. But he had no choice. He couldn't let Pam, or anyone, get caught in the crossfire. He was already in too deep. And now, there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur of hurried plans, whispered conversations, and unspoken tension. Jamal and Pam worked in secret, preparing to confront the problem they'd uncovered. Every move had to be calculated, every decision precise. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Jamal had a small but effective network, people who owed him favors, people who knew the streets better than anyone. He reached out to them, asking for help without explaining too much. They all knew Cortez was bad news, and even those who were afraid of him were willing to step up if it meant getting rid of the menace. Pam, however, was a different story. She wasn't used to operating under these conditions. She wanted to be transparent, wanted to solve things the right way, by the book. But Jamal had seen too many people try that approach and fail. The system wasn't on their side. They had to fight smart, not fair. "I know what you're thinking," Jamal said one evening as they sat in the back of a local diner, sketching out the plan. "You want to go in all guns blazing, but that's not how we're going to win this. We need to use the connections we've made." Pam, who had been staring down at the napkin in front of her, looked up. "I don't want to compromise my morals, Jamal. This isn't who I am." He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I get that. I do. But you've got to understand, the people you're dealing with don't care about morals. They care about power. They care about control. If we try to play by the rules, we'll lose. And people will get hurt." Pam hesitated, her expression conflicted. But in the end, she knew he was right. She couldn't afford to be naive, not with so much at stake. "Fine. But we have to keep it clean. We don't become like them, Jamal. That's the line we won't cross." "I agree," Jamal said, though he wasn't sure how long that would last. He wasn't optimistic about what they were about to do, but he knew it was the only way. The first step in the plan was to gather intelligence, find out exactly what Cortez was doing and how far his influence spread. Jamal made contact with a few of his old acquaintances who worked in the same circles as the crime boss. They were hesitant at first, but Jamal's reputation preceded him. No one was fooling themselves. If Cortez found out they were talking, it would mean trouble. But Jamal's words carried weight, and soon he had enough information to make a move. Pam, meanwhile, took a different approach. She began quietly talking to some of the residents who had been frequenting the community meetings, asking questions under the guise of gathering feedback. She didn't let on that she knew about the infiltration, but she could feel the pressure mounting. People were starting to pull away, sensing something wasn't right. They were scared. The fear was palpable, spreading through the streets like wildfire. The more they dug, the darker it became. Cortez's empire wasn't just about drugs and money laundering. It was far more intricate than that. He had ties to local politicians, business owners, and even some of the people who worked within the system. Jamal realized just how deep the rot ran, and the more he learned, the more dangerous their position became. One night, after hours of phone calls and hurried meetings, Jamal and Pam met at the diner again. This time, there was no plan. No strategy. Just desperation. "I didn't think it would be this bad," Pam admitted, staring at the table. I thought we could make a difference. But it feels like we're up against something that can't be stopped. Jamal looked at her, seeing the doubt in her eyes. It's not impossible. It just means we have to be smarter, faster, and a lot more careful. We're not taking them down all at once. We're chipping away at their foundation, one piece at a time. Yeah, but what if it's not enough? Pam's voice trembled with the weight of her uncertainty. What if we're just fighting a losing battle? Jamal met her gaze, his expression steely. Then we fight anyway. We do it because someone has to. Someone has to show them we won't just lie down and take it. They think they can control everything, but they can't control us. Pam nodded, a flicker of resolve igniting in her. All right. What's the next step? Jamal smiled grimly. Next, we start turning the tables. We take what they've been using against us and make it work for us. The following week, Jamal put his plan into motion. He leveraged his network to spread misinformation among Cortez's men. He fed them false intel, causing them to turn on each other, sowing distrust and confusion. Pam continued her quiet investigation, gathering crucial evidence that she would later use to expose the depth of Cortez's operation. It was risky. The longer they played this game, the more dangerous it became. Jamal could feel the tension building in the air, like the calm before a storm. But they were close, so close to bringing everything to light. Then, one evening, everything came to a head. Jamal's network fed him the final piece of the puzzle, a plan Cortez was set to put into motion, one that could take down not just the community, but the entire city. It was big, bigger than anything Jamal had expected. But it was also their chance to end this once and for all. Pam met Jamal at the community center that night, her eyes wide with determination. We have to act fast, she said. We will, Jamal said, his voice calm, though his heart was racing. But we have to be careful. We can't take them all down at once. We need to isolate them, cut off their support, then go for the jugular. Pam nodded, her mind already racing through the logistics. And after that? After that, Jamal said, we take back the streets. The plan was set in motion, and Jamal knew there was no turning back. The pieces were in place, the groundwork laid. It was a delicate dance of timing, precision, and most importantly, trust. But in the back of his mind, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that this could all go horribly wrong. He had seen firsthand how quickly things could spiral, how easily the system could crush people who tried to challenge it. Pam, for all her optimism and dedication, was still a rookie in the world of street-level crime. Jamal had been around long enough to know that the game wasn't won with good intentions alone. It was won with strategy, without thinking the enemy before they even knew what hit them. And that's exactly what he intended to do. Over the next few days, the intensity picked up. Jamal had been in contact with the people he trusted the most, making sure everything was aligned. He fed the right people false information, making sure it reached the ears of Cortez's inner circle. At the same time, Pam continued her work, slowly piecing together evidence that would expose the entire operation. She didn't know it yet, but her efforts were beginning to undermine everything Cortez had worked for. Pam was determined, though. As much as Jamal respected her tenacity, he knew she was playing with fire. She wanted to do things the right way, the legal way. She wanted to expose Cortez with a press conference, with an arrest and a trial. But Jamal knew that wouldn't work. Not with someone like Cortez. The man had power, influence, and the means to cover his tracks. He wouldn't go down quietly. Jamal had tried to warn her, but Pam was determined to do it her way. We have to take him down legally, she had said, her voice firm. If we start using underhanded methods, we're no better than him. Jamal had understood her point, but he also understood the reality of the situation. Pam, sometimes the system doesn't work. And sometimes we have to break the rules to make it work. You want to stop Cortez? You want to save this community? Then we need to move fast. We need to be smart. Pam had stared at him for a long time, clearly conflicted. But in the end, she had agreed. Fine, she had said. We do it your way. But we do it carefully. No unnecessary risks. It was the compromise they needed. They couldn't afford to take any chances, not now. Jamal's network had been invaluable. His contacts inside the crime world were beginning to turn against Cortez, feeding him information that Jamal was using to create chaos. He planted doubts, spread rumors, and made sure Cortez's operation was slowly crumbling from the inside. Jamal's plan was to destabilize the entire network, cut off their resources, expose their weaknesses, and leave them vulnerable. But even as he worked to undermine Cortez, Jamal knew that the real test would come when the time was right to make his move. He would need to make sure that Pam was fully prepared for what was to come. The stakes were too high for anyone to act recklessly. If they failed now, everything they had worked for would be in jeopardy. On the night everything changed, Jamal and Pam were at the community center, reviewing the final details. They had spent days coordinating with their contacts, making sure that everything was aligned for the strike. The moment of truth had arrived. Cortez's operation was on the verge of collapse, and all they had to do was pull the trigger. Pam was visibly nervous, but she didn't show it. She was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. "We've done everything we can. Now it's time to make our move." Jamal nodded, but inside, his heart was racing. "We don't get a second chance at this, Pam. Once we move, we can't back down." "I know," Pam said. "We're ready." Jamal took a deep breath. The next few hours would determine everything. If they were successful, they would dismantle Cortez's empire. If they failed, it would mean disaster for everyone involved. They moved fast. The first step was to isolate the members of Cortez's crew, using the misinformation Jamal had spread. It worked like a charm. One by one, Cortez's men started to turn on each other. Trust evaporated as confusion and paranoia set in. It was a domino effect, one small piece of chaos causing everything to fall apart. Pam and Jamal watched from the sidelines as everything unfolded. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. They couldn't afford to be seen. The entire operation depended on secrecy. Then, in the midst of the chaos, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. Jamal received a call from one of his contacts, a trusted ally within Cortez's network. The tip was clear: Cortez was on his way to meet with his most trusted associates. It was the perfect opportunity to catch him off guard. Pam and Jamal exchanged a glance. They both knew that this was their chance. "Let's go," Jamal said, his voice low but firm. "It's now or never." The two of them moved quickly, heading toward the location where Cortez and his crew were set to meet. They stayed in the shadows, blending in with the environment. Jamal's heart was pounding, but he kept his focus. He had been in situations like this before, but this time felt different. The stakes were higher, the risks greater. But there was no turning back now. As they approached the meeting place, Jamal's mind raced. He knew they had to act quickly. Pam was right behind him, but he could feel her nerves. This was the moment of truth. There would be no second chances. The sound of voices reached their ears, and they paused. Cortez's men were gathered just ahead, talking in low voices. Jamal motioned for Pam to stay silent, and she nodded. They moved closer, carefully positioning themselves for the strike. This was it. They were about to confront Cortez and take down his entire operation. It was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment that would define everything they had worked for. If they succeeded, they would have saved the community, dismantled the criminal empire, and perhaps even redeemed themselves in the process. But if they failed, everything they had done would be for nothing. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Jamal stood at the edge of the warehouse, peering into the dimly lit room where Cortez's men had gathered. His fingers tingled with anticipation, but he remained calm, his focus razor-sharp. Pam was beside him, equally poised but with an unmistakable nervous energy. This was the final moment. No more planning, no more second chances. They had worked for this, bled for it, and now it was time to either end Cortez's reign or risk everything they had fought for. Jamal felt a strange calm wash over him. Despite the weight of the situation, despite knowing that their lives could change in an instant, he knew there was no turning back. "We take him down tonight," he whispered, more to himself than to Pam. "Everything we've done, every move we've made, leads to this." Pam nodded but said nothing, her expression determined. She was ready, but Jamal could sense that part of her still wasn't fully convinced. She wanted everything to go by the book, but this wasn't a case where following rules would guarantee success. This was the kind of operation that required taking risks, getting dirty, and doing whatever it took to win. The plan had been laid out clearly. Jamal's network had sabotaged Cortez's operations in a series of strategic moves, spreading disinformation and undermining the people closest to him. The confusion in Cortez's camp had already set the wheels of his downfall into motion, but now they had to strike. It wasn't enough to just weaken the operation. They had to make sure Cortez himself was caught in the crossfire. Jamal's mind raced as he recalled the details of the plan. Pam would confront Cortez directly, with Jamal in the shadows, ready to provide backup. He had arranged for a group of trusted allies to position themselves around the building, ready to move when the signal came. The plan had been designed to box Cortez in, to trap him and his remaining allies in a situation where there was no escape. Every angle had been covered. Every contingency planned for. But even as the plan unfolded in his mind, Jamal knew that things rarely went as planned. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for a second. The reality of what they were doing was sobering. This wasn't just about taking down a crime lord. This was about changing the dynamics of power in their community, about showing that no one was untouchable, no matter how much money or influence they had. It was about revenge, redemption, and justice. Cortez had always seen himself as untouchable, someone above the law. He had built his empire by exploiting the weaknesses of others, by using his wealth and connections to manipulate the system. He had never been held accountable for his actions, and Jamal knew that was the most dangerous thing about him. Cortez wasn't just a criminal, he was a symbol of the broken system, the inequality that perpetuated the suffering of communities like Jamal's. That's why Jamal had to make sure this plan succeeded. There could be no mistakes. He couldn't afford to let Cortez slip away, couldn't afford to let him continue ruining lives. Every moment, every decision, would be critical in ensuring that Cortez's empire crumbled. It was more than just about revenge. It was about righting the wrongs that had been done, about fighting back against a system that had left his community to rot while criminals like Cortez thrived. Pam shifted beside him, and Jamal snapped back to the present. He could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen when she first began this fight. She had been hesitant at first, unsure of how far she was willing to go, but now there was no doubt in her mind. She understood the stakes, understood that this wasn't just about one criminal. It was about changing everything. "Ready?" Jamal asked, his voice low but firm. Pam gave him a determined look, nodding once. "Let's do this." The signal was given, and everything moved quickly. Jamal's allies surged into action, cutting off all exits and surrounding the building. They had outmaneuvered Cortez, and now it was time to finish what they had started. Pam, stepping into the lion's den, was both a symbol and a catalyst. She was the one who would confront Cortez head-on, the one who would make him face the consequences of his actions. As Jamal moved into position, watching from a hidden vantage point, he could feel the pulse of the operation, the rhythm of the plan as it unfolded perfectly. Everything was going according to schedule. Cortez was cornered, and his men were beginning to panic. Jamal's pulse quickened as he saw the chaos inside the building, the shift in power that was happening in real time. Pam's voice echoed through the building, calm but commanding as she confronted Cortez, demanding his surrender. She was unflinching, unwavering, even though Jamal could see the fear in her eyes. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it was still jarring. This was more than a raid. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed. Cortez was furious, his arrogance still evident despite the desperation in his eyes. He had never been in a position like this before, never had someone challenge his authority so directly. Jamal knew that he would try to fight back, that he would use whatever resources he had left to escape. But this time, it wasn't going to work. This time, Jamal had the upper hand. Everything that had been set into motion was about to come to a head. The outcome was still uncertain, but Jamal felt a surge of confidence. They were ready. Pam was ready. And in the end, justice would prevail. The community would be free of the tyrant who had ruled it with fear for so long. Jamal wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had been crushed under the weight of Cortez's reign. He was fighting for the future. As Pam's voice rang out, demanding Cortez's surrender once more, Jamal knew they were on the brink of something bigger than just a victory. This was a shift, a turning point. The tide was changing. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The final moments were unfolding before Jamal's eyes, and the weight of everything they had worked for hung in the balance. As Cortez's men scrambled in confusion, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jamal could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that their leader's empire was collapsing. They were now just pawns in a game they had long controlled, and the tables had turned. The power dynamics had shifted, and it was clear that Cortez's influence was no longer absolute. Pam's voice echoed throughout the building, her tone commanding as she urged the remaining criminals to surrender. Jamal had never heard her sound so fierce, so resolute. She was no longer the officer who had stumbled into his life, but a woman who had taken ownership of her role in this revolution. It wasn't just about the arrest anymore, it was about standing up for something greater. Jamal knew that in this moment she had become more than an ally, she had become a symbol of everything they had been fighting for. The realization hit Jamal like a wave. This wasn't just about saving his family or taking down a crime boss. It was about showing his community that they had the power to reclaim their future. Cortez had built his empire by preying on the vulnerable, by exploiting the system for his own gain. But now, that empire was crumbling, and Jamal could feel the hope rising in his chest. Cortez was cornered, his options dwindling with every passing second. Jamal's plan had worked flawlessly, each move calculated and precise. The men who had once been loyal to him were now scattered and confused, unsure of where to turn. Some were starting to surrender, their defiance melting away as they realized the fight was over. Others, more desperate, made a last-ditch effort to escape, only to find themselves quickly neutralized by Jamal's team. But it wasn't just the criminals who were impacted. The very fabric of the community was changing before Jamal's eyes. People who had once lived in fear of Cortez were beginning to see the possibility of something better. Jamal felt a surge of pride as he realized the magnitude of what they were doing. This wasn't just about one man or one family, it was about the future of an entire community. Pam, despite the chaos, remained composed. Her eyes never wavered from Cortez, and there was no hesitation in her movements. Jamal could see the resolve in her, and he couldn't help but feel grateful for her unwavering support. She had become more than just the officer who had crossed his path that fateful day, she had become a true partner, someone he could rely on in the most dangerous of circumstances. The final moments of the operation were a blur of action. Cortez, realizing that his empire was gone, tried one last time to assert his dominance. He attempted to make a break for the back door, but it was too late. Jamal was already there, blocking his path, his eyes cold and unforgiving. He had waited for this moment, for this exact confrontation. He had made it clear that Cortez's reign of terror was over, and now the criminal was about to pay the price for his actions. Cortez's face twisted with fury, but Jamal wasn't intimidated. He had seen the worst of what this man was capable of, had witnessed the destruction he had caused. This was the final reckoning, the moment when the scales of justice were finally balanced. Jamal stood firm, the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he remained resolute. He wasn't just doing this for himself or his family. He was doing it for everyone who had ever been oppressed, for everyone who had been hurt by Cortez's actions. The standoff was brief but intense. Jamal's voice rang out, commanding Cortez to surrender. There was no room for negotiation, no chance for mercy. Cortez was a threat to the community, to the very fabric of society, and he had to be stopped. As Jamal spoke, his words were laced with the years of pain, frustration, and loss that had fueled this battle. It wasn't just about vengeance, it was about justice. It was about ensuring that the people who had suffered under Cortez's reign would finally have the chance to heal. Pam stepped forward, her hand firmly gripping her weapon. She had been with Jamal from the beginning, and now she was standing by his side in the final moments of this war. Jamal could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to challenge the system and take on the criminals who had terrorized her community. Together, they were an unstoppable force, united in their mission to bring about change. With a swift movement, Jamal disarmed Cortez, taking control of the situation in one decisive action. It was over. The power had shifted. The man who had once controlled the streets was now at the mercy of the very people he had exploited. As the authorities arrived to take Cortez into custody, Jamal felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the arrest, it was about the larger victory, the cultural shift that had been set into motion. The people who had been oppressed, the ones who had been silenced by fear, now had a voice. They had seen that change was possible, that they could take control of their own futures. Jamal had not only taken down a crime lord, he had ignited a movement. But the work was far from over. Jamal knew that Cortez was only one part of the problem. The system that had allowed men like him to thrive was still in place, and it would take more than one victory to dismantle it. But for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt a sense of hope. He knew that the fight wasn't over, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had Pam by his side, and together, they could continue to push for change. As they watched Cortez being escorted away in handcuffs, Jamal turned to Pam and smiled. "We did it," he said, his voice full of quiet pride. Pam smiled back, her eyes glinting with the same sense of accomplishment. "We did," she agreed. "But this is just the beginning." And as Jamal looked out over the streets that had once been ruled by fear, he knew she was right. The battle for justice, for equality, for change, was far from over. But tonight they had made history. And that was something no one could take away from them.